Hi everyone, how are you? How are you doing? As usual, don't look at the house, it's a total tip. Oh, first of all, who's been watching the procession and the lying in state? And I was out for a lot of the day, but I've been catching up. And I've actually found it incredibly emotional. Um, have you? What have you been thinking? Are you untouched by it? Has it touched you? Has it triggered your any feelings that you have around grief and losing somebody? Um, I found it really emotional watching people. There's been no fakery. It's always all been incredibly British. As I've seen people being interviewed in the queues, they are the way people are, because further down in the queues, where people are quite far away from Westminster, it's got a little bit of a party atmosphere. Of course, it has. People are getting to know each other. They've been standing there for hours. And then as they get closer and closer to Westminster, you can see them getting, as they interview people closer to Westminster, how emotional people are getting and just like it's catching them the whole time. I've been really moved by it. I really, really have. And like I've said to you all the way through this, each day I get more and more moved by it as you realise the enormity of it. And I was just saying to Maddie, I said, God, when you think about it, she was probably the most famous, or is the most famous, the biggest star on the planet. I mean, every world leader, bar from the few that they haven't invited, is going to be there. Hundreds of thousands of people queuing. I mean, they're going to stop the queue at 10 miles. I mean, I just saw a guy walking, an elderly man, walking past the coffin, and he was all suited up. He had his medals and he had a walking frame. So that means he's been queuing for God knows how long, and he went past and he just really gently and slowly just nodded to the coffin. And oh my God, it made me cry. And then I saw a little boy just walking past and just going, wow, wow. You couldn't hear him, but you could just hear it mouth, and you just think, yeah, you had just been hit by the enormity that you are actually right in now, history being made. Whatever you think of the royal family, completely respect anyone who doesn't think much of them. That's totally fine, but you can't get away from the pageantry that we're seeing, the history. Oh God, all these things that you're finding out, like where the sapphire and the crown comes and what this person does and what this regiment does and that, and the astonishing elderly men standing without moving a muscle, the discipline. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it. I can't sit still for long enough. It's just, so all of that has blown my mind. It really has blown my mind. But I know that it's made us, many of us. Yeah, it does, Anne-Marie. It does seem like a pilgrimage. I think that's exactly the right word. Yeah, I think for many of us it has brought up feelings of grief for those people that we've, loved and lost. And yesterday we were talking about this article, weren't we? And I thought I would share some of this. Now, this is Princess Diana's friend, Julia Samuel, and she did this article was out yesterday, I think in the Times, yeah. And she's a psychotherapist and bereavement counsellor, and it was just such a beautifully written article. Obviously, I'm not going to go through it all, but if you get the chance, read it. Wednesday, September the 14th. Was it today? What day is it today? No, this didn't come out today. It was yesterday. And it's just like, it's her tips, really, on dealing with grief. But there's so many beautiful things said in here. And so, be as honest as you can about death. That's one of the things. She says, often in families, someone has a potentially life-limiting illness or is nearing the end of life. It isn't discussed. Well, I do that. I talk to the girls about the fact that, their grandparents aren't going to be here, realistically, for ages. And, you know, sometimes the girls will say, oh, don't. I say, no, it's better to just talk about it. It's really so much better to talk about it. Because actually, when you talk about it, it takes some of the fear out of it. You know, rather than just suppressing it and just like hoping and pretending it's never going to happen, because it is. So that she writes more about that, and it's all very, very interesting. And she says, don't block the pain, but do take a break from it. And this is what Mark and I was talking about when it comes to feelings, with both of us being so sort of interested and engaged in all mental health issues. And she writes really beautifully about this, that, you know, she talks about the fact that it's really important to have your feelings, but it's also important to have like a toolbox of how you can sometimes leave those feelings. So, for instance, if you were glued to the telly the entire time all day and feeling very, very sad, then, you know, that might be right for you, but it also might get to the point where it's a bit too overwhelming, and to take a break and to do something else. And she described the way that children deal with grief, which is like they jump in and out of puddles. So they jump into the puddle, and I can remember this being at funerals and watching the way that children are with their grief. Like, they'll suddenly be really sad, and then they go off and play, and they have a sausage roll, and they have a bit of a jump around, and they annoy somebody, and then they jump back into the grief and they jump back out of it. But I think the problem is there's so much judgment. And, you know, when I lost somebody very close to me, I found that very hard, that everybody else seemed to have an idea of exactly how I should be behaving. You know, it was like, oh, she's doing this. Oh, she's gone out. Oh, she's having a drink. Oh, I saw her laughing. And children don't have that judgment, so they just go impulsively and instinctively with how they feel. And I love how she writes about that. Where is this bit where she says, it's okay to laugh when you're grieving. She says, when someone dies, our work is coming to terms with the fact, but recognising too that your love and your relationship with them continues and never dies. And so we can have touchstones to memory and acts of memory, of enjoying the music they loved, or cooking their favourite dessert, or wearing a piece of their jewellery, and roaring with laughter at a memory or a silly joke, because that relationship continues. The more we can do to support and allow that relationship and feel the joy and the gratitude that they lived and were in our life, the more that supports us to feel their pain, the pain of their loss. Don't you think that's so lovely? And so true. And she talks about how why she's talking about that is that people can be so judgmental about it, but really the way we are going to respond when somebody dies is already decided in our characters. And that whatever that way is, like some people might go out partying, other people might want to disappear into a bottle, other people might need to just cry and be very, whatever it is right for that person. It's really, really important that you don't judge them. I love this. She says, guilt is an unwelcome aspect of grief. And she said, survivor's guilt almost always emerges when someone dies. People can torture themselves with the what ifs. What if I'd run? What if I'd gone over? All the what ifs can haunt you. So it's so, and I love this line, guilt, the most painful companion of grief. So it's really important not to conflate feelings of guilt with the fact that you are guilty, because you are not guilty. It's highly unlikely that it wasn't in your power to save the person who died. And I think that's so true, isn't it? Everyone has guilt. I mean, God Almighty, I know that. Guilt comes from a false sense that we have control. It's helpful to acknowledge the guilt, to say, I feel like I've done something wrong, but to follow that through with rational thinking. It was beyond my control. Recognise that and surrender to that fact. I think it's really interesting how the guilt and the grief can get conflate and get all enmeshed, so you're confused as to what is real and what isn't. As she says, it's highly unlikely and rare that anyone could do anything to stop somebody dying, you know. Words aren't compulsory. Place and smell are powerful memory aids, and to use them to help people to open up. So maybe like cooking the chicken dish your grandmother used to cook can invoke the sense of her. You can travel miles and years with that smell. I think that's lovely. I hope my kids think of, like, when they smell a nice roast chicken, they think of me. I'd like that. I'd really like that. For me. Yeah. She said, grief feels like being thrown onto an alien planet. The rest of the world looks like a place you used to live in, but you don't know it anymore. That's so true. In the fright and shock of what's happened, our whole system may go into hyper-arousal. I love this bit. We're on alert, as if the threatening Jaws music is constantly in our head. It is terrifying, grief, isn't it? It's like the most dark, scary, scary feeling. Terrifying. That's why as well I'm just looking at all the royal family and I'm thinking, you're going through all of this and you cannot show a shred of emotion. I mean, I was just watching the bit where Princess Anne and Charles go and stand right by the coffin. I just saw an amazing picture of the Princess of Wales and Sophie Wessex just looking like this at the coffin. And anybody that's lost anybody knows that feeling when you go, oh my God, they're in there. It's the most, oh God, bizarre, helpless, overwhelming, frightening, final feeling, isn't it? And yet they can't do anything. The discipline of the soldiers, of everyone in there. Yeah. Acknowledging that we're frightened and sad is helpful, absolutely. But we're in panic mode, we can't think properly. Intentionally weaving small comfort behaviours into the fabric of our day. Things like outdoor exercise, moving in nature, coming home, making a cup of tea, hugging a friend, family member or pet can stabilise and calm our system. How many times do we talk about this? About whatever it is, not necessarily grief, but anxiety and overwhelmingness and low mood, not depression, because sometimes you can't get out of bed, but just getting out in nature, the power of getting out in nature and walking. Yeah. When I think of my sister, I remember wonderful times. So lovely. My 92-year-old grandfather, this is from Sawalha-Adderleys, passed away 2 weeks before the Queen was on holiday in Scotland, but my mum told me to carry on enjoying myself, and now I associate good memories of him with the Scottish beauty. Exactly. Again, you know, the way you grieve, the way you mourn, the way you pay respect is a very individual thing. And I think why a lot of guilt comes alongside grief is because until you've lost somebody, you actually have no idea what grief is like. You can imagine it. So, you know, and I've said this before, you know, so when people were saying to me, oh God, look at the way you behave, oh, you're still going back to work so early, I was like, oh my God, where's the book? I didn't know there was a book. Where's the book? Well, it says exactly how we're supposed to behave. Well, who else has got the book? Can somebody else give me the book? Because you just swirl around. That's why I love this article, because she really talks beautifully about that. She always talks about there'll always be people who actually dare to say to yourself when a beloved older relative dies, but they had a good innings. Now, they're probably just trying to make you feel better by fixing it, but they don't realise, and I think this is so true, how upsetting it is, because what that person that you're saying that to feels like they're denying you your pain, your sadness, your grief, because they had a good innings. But what I would say is, I also think, and a friend of mine who lost her mum and dad, we always say, though it's so painful, she lost them both within 18 months. Whenever we talk about them, we always say, and there is comfort in it, that they had a good life. Doesn't mean, I mean, I think the thing is, I think if you're going to say something like that to somebody, you have to say, the pain is exactly the same no matter how old somebody is or how unwell you knew they were. At some point, the horror of the light just being turned off is horrific. That's what it's like, isn't it? The lights turned off. Maddie was saying to me today, I just can't believe how final death is. So I think even if somebody's 105, you say, oh my God, you must be in absolute agony. You had so much more time to love them because they were with you. Like, people are so upset because what do you hear people say over and over again? The Queen was always there. And it's the loss of that person that was always there is huge, it's vast, it's seismic, the loss, isn't it? But then I think to also comfort somebody and say, and point out the good things in their life and say, the pain is the same of the loss, but how wonderful that she had a husband that she loved and loved her back. How incredible that she got to travel, or whatever it is, you know, or did the job she loved, or anything. I think finding something positive, I find whenever I talk to people that have lost people about that person they've lost, it always brings us a warm smile from people. And to talk about fun memories. I mean, we've done it, haven't we, here? I mean, we've heard so many lovely things about the Queen. We're all a bit sick of the Theresa May story now. It was great the first 20 times, but I think we've heard it about 100 times now. Yeah, exactly. Happy Bernie. The Queen has been our one key mainstay, point of stability all these years. I do think at the moment as well, it's not just the Queen we're celebrating with all this pomp and ceremony. I think we felt so lost, hasn't we? Felt the country. I mean, how many people say the country's going down the pan? You know, and so this sort of reminds us of the Great Britain that people think of, don't they? Like why all the tourists come and all of that. So I think there's some comfort in that. So though people are grieving and they're mourning and they're sad, there's also a feeling of warmth to the country. I do worry there's going to be a bit of a downer again when it all stops. I just love the way, because sometimes it feels like there's so many stories about, you know, the violence, especially in London, the violence in London, the lawlessness, all of that. And yet, you know, I was in London today, and to see people just behaving so brilliantly. I mean, that queue. I mean, God, we're now showing our brilliance for queuing, aren't we? Fair queuing. Yeah. The other thing she talks about is family conflict in the aftermath, and I think that's a really important thing to think about as well, is that everybody deals with grief in such a different way, don't they? And that's why they say it's so, you know, so often when people might lose a child, it's often sadly the way that they're then split up because they're coming at their grief in such a different way that one's getting angry that they're not feeling it in the same way. And again, you've got to within your own family, your own close, and everyone starts fighting and everything, and it happens so often, doesn't it? Happens so often. And again, I suppose it's just remembering that we are pre-programmed in the way that we're going to deal with grief, and that everybody's way, as long as you're not hurting somebody or doing something dangerous to yourself, has to be respected, I suppose. Here, this is the line she says, don't judge how someone else is coping or call it disrespectful, because the minute we hear the news, our default coping mechanism springs into action and we don't have any choice in what it is. I think that's amazing. Like somebody there saying, I couldn't even cry. Like, not being able to cry is a huge show of grief. And yet some people, don't they, say, oh, well, you didn't see her crying. Like, I had that when, you know, when I lost somebody. I would be crying 1 minute and laughing the next. And if somebody saw me laughing, well, then, you know, that was terrible. But that's the way it is. And you know the other thing? Somebody I know that lost somebody, I don't know, about 3 or 4 months ago. I can see that she is nowhere near landing from the shock of losing her loved one. And so she's sort of moving around like everything's normal. But to me, I'm most worried about her, more worried about her than if she was throwing herself on the floor and crying the whole time, because I just think, oh my God, it hasn't hit you yet. It can take years, can't it? Yeah, anyway, I've rambled a bit. I've rambled a wee bit, haven't I? Mark's going to be in any minute, and so I'm going to leave you guys now because he is going to be doing a live Instagram, I think on mental health and drinking with Lee Durrant. So either on Mark's Instagram or Lee Durrant's. If you want to see Mark, because I bet you've missed him today, you can see him there at 7 o'clock tonight. Oh, thank you, Michelle. You're such a good friend. And I want to see you. We haven't seen you for far too long. Yeah, my ramblings on grief and other things. Simply don't want about other things tonight. But anyway, I was just paraphrasing all over the place with that article, but I just thought it was a really thoughtful and really helpful article. And you know, both Mark and I have read it, and we've both had loads of epiphanies. Oh God, yeah. Oh yeah, that's how I felt. Oh yeah. What's the thing we all want more of? To be heard. For somebody else to say, you know what? It's all right that you felt like that. Anyway, I love you and leave you. Bye. See you tomorrow.